With us today is Jeff Dyer. He is the author most recently of the book Innovation Capital: How to Compete and Win Like the World's Most Innovative Leaders. Before this, he's written two other books on innovation, one called Innovation, The Innovator's DNA, and the other, The Innovator's Method. He has two co-authors for both of those books. He originally was consultant with Bain and Company and then went into academia. And we're lucky enough to have him with us on the show. Jeff, welcome to the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Thanks, Peter. Glad to be with you today.
I should also say that you're a professor at strategy at Brigham Young University. So you've really, and when I say entered into academia, you've really entered into academia. So I'm kind of curious why innovation. This is your third book on innovators or innovation. What captures you about innovation?
Well, really my interest was sparked almost 17, 18 years ago. Had a conversation with Clayton Christensen, well known at Harvard for disruptive innovation, and a colleague who was then at BYU with me, Hal Gregerson. And we were talking with Clay. He'd become sort of famous for disruptive innovation. And I had this question, which was, Clay, do you know anything about where disruptive business ideas come from? Do we know anything really about the innovators themselves or how they come up with these ideas, whether they're different from the rest of us? He said, no, I don't know much about that. And that was something that was really interesting to me, in part because I didn't think I was particularly creative or innovative. I thought I was a kind of creatively challenged, wanted to see how these folks might be different, thought it would be really interesting to study a large sample of them and to interview them and talk to them. And so that really began my journey into understanding first where do creative ideas come from, which was the innovator's DNA.
Right.
Then innovator's method was, well, once you have a creative idea, how do I test it and validate it before I invest?
So
right?
at this
What's the process?
And so at this point, by the way, you had left Bain and you had already sort of begun your engagement with academia. Is that right?
That's right. So I left Bain. I've been there as a consultant and manager for about 5 years, went to UCLA for a PhD, then went to Wharton as a professor in strategy. And I've actually maintained my professor position at Wharton. So I've been there for the last 25 years. But I have sort of moved full-time at BYU and just part-time at Wharton.
So let me ask you a question about consulting in general, which I found interesting, and I've worked in consulting firms as well. And I was always a little surprised in the consulting firms that I've worked with, where I thought consulting should be all about innovation. And I actually think I am kind of creative. Like I have this image of myself as kind of creative. And I went into these consulting firms wanting to leverage creativity and innovation. And what I found, my experience was the opposite, which was the response was, no, we've got our methodology, follow the methodology. We're not so interested in your being creative and innovative. We're more interested in replicating methodology across 50,000 people. And I'm curious because when you were a consultant at Bain, and yet you also have this image of yourself as not particularly creative or innovative or wanting to stoke that. And I'm curious whether there was a disconnect at the consulting firm or whether you kind of entered it wanting to be more innovative and you didn't find it, or what your experience was at Bain.
Sure. So I think consulting firms like Bain, McKinsey, BCG, they're really good at structured problem solving. Mm-hmm. I think innovation is something that they're not particularly good at, to be honest, because we know that often innovation requires some level of expertise. And that was one of the other reasons I decided to go to academia. Is I actually wanted to try and become an expert at something where I could talk to companies or clients in an area that I had studied deeply and knew well, knew all of the nuances. And you're flying a little bit by the seat of your pants sometimes in consulting. So I felt like it was really
so hold on. So you're busting every non-consultant's image of what consulting is, because literally people hire consultants to bring expertise into their organization. And what you're saying is actually the people who are hiring them have much more expertise than the consultants do.
They have more expertise in their industry, their product arenas with their technologies.
Right.
And that's what's really critical for important innovation,
Right.
which is around creating new products and services, right? That's the innovation that creates engines of growth for companies.
Right.
So now, this is not to say that it never happens at consulting
Right.
firms. I remember at Bain, so I was there from 1984 to 1989,
Right.
so way back in the day. And I remember we had built a very large healthcare practice.
Uh-huh.
We worked with something like 65 hospitals at the time. And the way that it started was a serendipitous visit from a manufacturing expert in the company.
Right.
Was sent to a hospital, and they were looking at cost reduction. Now, this was right after the U.S., the government had imposed diagnostic-related groups, fixed cost reimbursement, meaning you couldn't just do cost plus anymore. You had to care about cost.
Right.
And this manufacturing expert, he's looking at the hospital, and he says, so how do you guys think about managing throughput? Like, how many touches are there to the patient? How do you how do you quickly get them in and out the door? He's thinking about this like a manufacturing plant.
So,
right?
like the patient is a widget, and you're trying to move them through the factory line.
Exactly. And everything was designed for the opposite at the time, because you wanted the highest quality of the care and you wanted the highest cost possible, because cost plus means you get more profit if you have more cost.
Right.
So this really flipped the paradigm for how they thought about managing patients. And now you have to think of a patient as a widget to get them in and get them out as quickly as possible.
God, there's so many places to take this conversation, Jeff, because when I think about current healthcare, I think patients have become widgets, but costs have only, I just heard my health insurance was going up another 20% this year. So like costs have ballooned, and yet patients are treated more like widgets than ever.
That's
so
true. No,
like,
I think that's true.
But that's not our conversation.
But I think that the point is sometimes if you come in with expertise and see a problem from a different angle,
right,
in a consulting firm, there are times when then you can bring something that's new,
right,
to the organization and to that conversation, and you have some, pretty smart folks there,
right.
But I mean, if you look at the engines of growth in our economy, they don't come from consulting firms.
Right.
They come from people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk.
Right.
Who
are the people that you write about. And
that's right.
And these are the people who are truly innovative, who in some ways sometimes innovate because of lack of expertise as opposed to expertise. And I'll just explain what I mean, and I'm curious to get your impression on this.
Sure.
But I was listening to an interview with Sarah Blakely, who was the creator of Spanx. I don't know if you know what Spanx are, but so far every man I've asked has no idea, and every woman I've asked knows exactly what they are. So so Spanx is, I might even describe it incorrectly, but it's a kind of underwear, pantyhose sort of combination. But it addresses the problem of panty lines that have existed in for women. And so I'm listening to this interview, and I absolutely adore it. And I think Sarah's brilliant, and I really, really enjoy the conversation that I heard her in. And one of the things that I really noticed was she was a total innovator. I mean, she created a product that was needed, but nobody else was creating. She was a woman going into a man's world in many ways, and getting them to see something they couldn't see beforehand. And almost every move she made because she didn't know. I mean, she kept saying this, like, I didn't know, like, a business plan? I don't know a business plan. I need a patent. Okay, how do I get a patent? I bought a bunch of books on patents. Sure. And I think so many people, if you actually know what you're getting, there's a leadership program I run, and it's very different than most leadership programs. And one of the comments I hear people say all the time is, had I known what I was getting myself into, I never would have come. Right. And it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. Right. And I think innovation, I wonder about whether innovation happens through, in some ways, lack of expertise as opposed to a surplus of expertise that might help hem us in and prevent us from going places we would go if we didn't know any better.
So I think that there are folks who come up with an idea around a need, and they have an insight there, and then they go kind of figure it out. Right. And they just do. Right. She's just experimenting, trying. But it succeeds because of, they see a need, They figure out a way to fill that demand. And I think of that as more customer first innovation.
Right.
It's the kind of innovation that actually Jeff Bezos and Amazon's very good at.
Right.
So they have what they call their working backwards process
Mm-hmm.
at Amazon, where you work backwards from the customer, right? And so you want to pitch a new product or service to the company. You pitch, here's the press release that goes to the market. Here's the need that we're addressing,
right,
and why it's important to address that need. And then you work back to figure out how to actually fulfill that need, right, with whatever the product or service is going to be. But
right.
you kind of assume you can build it, right? That
Right.
you can overcome what we think of as the technological uncertainty
Right.
associated with an innovation. So there's demand or market uncertainty. Will people buy it? And then there's technological uncertainty. Can we build it?
Right.
Now, if you look at an Elon Musk,
Which, by the way, arguably every business problem should be solved in that way, which is what is the outcome that we're trying to create, and then back into creating that outcome. I mean, I would argue that all of leadership, all of communication, all of, all work should start with what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, and then back into how we achieve it, as opposed to, oh, we have this capability, where could we apply it?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. At the same time, though, you compare Elon Musk. Mm-hmm. And the sort of businesses he's gone into.
Right.
So he's focused more on, I assume that people want electric cars that can reduce carbon emissions, right?
Right.
And I think it's going to be good for the world. And there are some huge technological challenges we have to overcome in order to get there, right? So we have to reduce the weight of a car in order for the battery to take it 300 miles, right?
Right.
We have to reduce the cost of the battery. We have to figure out how do we reduce the cost to a point that, it's actually feasible.
I see what you're saying, right.
And then you look at SpaceX.
Right.
It's like, well, if it's going to be cost effective, we have to have reusable rockets.
Right.
So, think about Hyperloop or boring. They're all about overcoming major technological challenges where he sort of, he assumes the customers or people will want this, right?
Right.
But the success is really built around overcoming the major technological challenges.
Right. And that's where you really need expertise.
That's where you really need expertise. And that's where in Innovation Capital, our book, we talk about how Musk ignites what we call the virtuous cycle of innovation leadership. Mm-hmm. Where he puts out a very exciting and lofty vision, right, to reduce carbon emissions and bring, really compelling electric cars to the market, or to go to Mars. And he uses these lofty visions to recruit some of the best engineers and scientists,
right?
Because they want to go after something big, right?
Right.
And so it's really an approach that he uses where he puts out a bold and lofty vision. It allows him to recruit the best. It increases the probability that he'll actually overcome these big technological challenges. And then when he does it, obviously, that creates momentum for his ventures.
Now, do you have to be Elon Musk in order to set that kind of a vision believably? Or do you have to be Bezos? Or can you be like Peter Bregman, who goes, if I said I'm really excited about putting someone on the moon, I have a lot less credibility and will attract many fewer engaged minds than when Jeff says it, when Jeff Bezos does it.
Sure. So CEO, founder of LinkedIn. And you're like, so what's the big, what's like the big vision for LinkedIn? And he told us, actually, our vision is we want to connect all 3 billion people in the world that are in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And we want to be able to create economic opportunity for all 3 billion of those folks.
Right.
And, that's, it's not going to Mars, right? But it's still, that's a pretty
It's inspiring to the people who want to get behind that vision. There's an element of inspiration to it.
Yeah, we're going to connect everybody. We're going to create economic opportunity. We're going to create ways that they can connect to find jobs. We're going to figure out ways they can get training for jobs.
Right.
This is going to be an engine for economic opportunity for, 3 billion people in the workforce in the world. And that's an important and lofty vision.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that, you start with, and then you lay out your strategic direction.
Right.
Sort of the stepping stones to move in that direction, and then you hit your stretch goals
Right.
for how are we going to hit the first stretch goal to move in
And
that
it's how
direction.
certainly in consulting, like we always learned, and it's a solid methodology, which is, you go vision, strategy, tactics. You sort of, start with the lofty thing and then drive your way down.
Right.
And that's
Right.
also what you're saying, consulting. I mean, I know this is a little off topic, but I'm interested in this, in like consultants not being innovators or being innovative, which is that consulting is they are no matter what experts in disciplined methodology around problem solving, whereas they
Exactly.
may not be experts at all in the in the innovations themselves, which consultants rely on clients to really have.
To come up with. Yeah.
Now, one more personal question, and then I want to get into these components of innovation capital that I find really interesting. I'm curious why you left Bain and went into academia.
So I decided that I wanted to be more of an expert when I was going to be advising, and I like you said, I felt like I was becoming an expert in the process of structured problem solving.
Right.
But I really didn't feel like, one of my final clients at Bain was Iowa Beef, largest meat packer, beef and cow and pig slaughter in the U.S. And
Tell me you're a vegan.
What's that?
I said, tell me you're a vegan.
Yeah, no, I'm not vegan, but and we had the part of the project was seeing if you could maybe perhaps brand, beef. This was sort of back before Angus beef and that, but still, I'm looking at this. I'm on the road a lot. I don't feel like I'm really an expert the way I'd like to be.
Right.
And so I decided, I think it's time to bite the bullet and go back and get a PhD in strategy. And it was really biting the bullet. My friends at Bain told me I obviously didn't understand the concept of opportunity cost.
Right.
Because, 5 years in a PhD program, at the time, cost me about $1.7 million. And it took me about 20 years to get back to my Bain salary. So
Right.
I didn't do it for the money,
Right.
but I did do it because I believed that I would love and enjoy my work more on a
Right.
daily basis.
Did it feel like a hard decision for you to make?
It was hard to leave the money.
Uh-huh.
I'll have to admit. But my father was a professor, and I saw the kind of lifestyle he had, the flexibility to be with his children.
Uh-huh.
Family's really important to me, and so I felt like it was the right trade-off.
When I think about innovators' DNA and I think about, what it takes to be an innovator, emotionally, it feels in some ways like it's the same decision as you leaving Bain and leaving the potential, this opportunity with, leaving Bain with an opportunity cost in order to pursue something that's kind of engaging to you. And it feels like from an emotional perspective, if your question is, here's the bit of therapy for you, but if your question is like, am I an innovator? There's a way in which emotionally that move is an innovator's move.
I think that's right. And I think, I've always liked Jeff Bezos telling his story about leaving D.E. Shaw, where he was making a lot of money. He was the stable guy. He decides to go leave and start Amazon. And his boss says, I think it's a really good idea, but I think it's a better idea for someone who doesn't already have a good job making a lot of money to go and do this. And he said, to make that decision, I came up with a framework, which he says only a nerd would use. It's called a regret minimization framework. So he says, I projected, that I'm now 80 years old, looking back on my life and trying to minimize the number of regrets that I have.
Right.
And he said, I decided, I wouldn't regret leaving D.E. Shaw. I wouldn't regret leaving some of that money. But he said, what I thought I really might regret was never trying this thing, Amazon, because I thought the internet was going to be a big thing. And so I think I might have always regretted that. And that's why I decided to make the decision to leave and to go
Right.
become an entrepreneur.
And as far as I know, not a decision that he's regretted.
No, yeah. Although I'm sure there are many entrepreneurs who have made that decision.
Yeah,
And
and have.
Right?
100%, right. So you have to know that you're making it like you did, not purely for the money you think you might be able to make, but because you're
Right.
sort of so engaged with the idea that it's a vision that captures you.
That's right. And one of the things we know about innovators, this was a study by Teresa Mobley at Harvard Business School, was that innovators tend to succeed when they're intrinsically motivated,
Right.
when they're pursuing ideas they care about, right? So if you want to be innovative, try and put yourself in a position at a company, in a career where you actually care about what you're doing.
Right. I've always felt that, and I've always felt that it's a much safer bet to pursue something you don't know whether will make you a lot of money or not, but you know you really love, than to pursue something that you don't particularly love, but you think will get you a lot of money. Because the downside at the end of the day is you've done a lot of work and you actually haven't made that money, or the market's turned, or you haven't. But the downside on the other side is you've done a lot of work that you really, really love and you haven't made that much money. And that's fine because you've spent your life doing things that you really love. And the upside is, you've made money and you've done what you love. And the upside in making a lot of money in something you don't love is that you've made a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right.
So I've always thought that too. Okay, run us through the components of innovation capital. I really like them, and I like them for two reasons. One is because they feel really spot on, and you talk about them in your book, Innovation Capital, but also because they feel very, very valid for anybody who wants to influence anyone else about anything. It's like, to me, it's not just innovation capital, it's persuasion capital, it's influence capital. It's like, do I want to help make sure that there's an impact of my ideas on the world in whatever way? And I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but I'm curious to get your perspective, to get your sort of the components.
So it is exactly persuasion capital in the arena of innovation.
Right.
And so what we learned from years of studying innovation is that creativity, coming up with the idea, and even sort of testing and validating that it might work, was only sort of half the story. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of folks who had good ideas but could never get the sponsorship, resources, financial resources, the sponsorship of leaders in their company. Mm-hmm. They could never get people to join their teams. And we realized that this was like a different skill set.
And so, in fact, there's like the innovation skill set of, I've got a great idea. There's the one you described earlier, which is, I've got a great idea and I've got expertise around it. And then there's, I've got a great idea, I've got expertise around it, and I'm actually able to sell it in a way that gets it worked on.
That's right. That's right. And I think, a comparison that we might all sort of know and appreciate is the difference between Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak at Apple, right? Wozniak was really the inventor behind the Apple, the first Apple computer. But Jobs had the ability to recruit people to his vision, to get resources to do new things, and to lead innovation in a way that Wozniak, couldn't. I mean, he was capable in his own right, but couldn't to the same degree. And that's really what we were trying to capture here in this study was, what's different about leaders that are able to really get people to provide financial resources or their own time and energy behind an innovation project that might not work, right? And that's the challenge is, if you're trying something that's really an innovation, it might not work. So it's risky. So you got to get people to put their money and time behind something that's risky, right? And so how do you overcome the risks that people don't want to take? In fact, what they want you to do, and you'll hear this from VCs all the time in Silicon Valley, go prove it out some more. Show me that it's really going to work. Right. Then come back. Then we'll give you money. Right. Right. But sometimes, you need the money and you need people to join the team to even sort of prove out the idea. Right. So run us down with just like a sentence or two on each of these different components. Sure. So what we learned is that if you're a sponsor, I'm evaluating you, deciding, do I support you? Right. Here's what they look at. Number one, they look at what we think of as your innovation-specific human capital. Mm-hmm. 3 components to that. One, are you a forward thinker? Do I believe you really know how to spot opportunities? Right. Number 2, are you a creative problem solver? Do I think you will be able to lead a team in solving a challenging problem? Right. And number 3, are you persuasive? I mean, can you articulate this vision in a way that will get others on board? So that's the human capital component of innovation capital. And And then it moves to an evaluation. Who else do you know that could be sponsors for this project, right? Do you know other innovators? Do you know business leaders? Do you know the organization leaders? Do you know influencers? We're more likely to want to support someone who's well connected with innovators, business leaders, other potential sponsors.
Right.
And then the third component is, what's your track record for innovation? Do you have any sort of a track record or reputation for innovation? And so I look at those.
I'm curious if the sort of track record for innovation is, it seems like it would be very tightly connected to, do I see you as someone who's forward thinking? Do I see you, like it seems to like really connect to the human capital piece.
I think it does to some extent, but you can see people early in their careers who you think have the human capital dimensions, like they're forward thinkers and you think they're creative problem solvers, but they don't have a track record.
That's interesting.
Of innovation. Right. They've never done it before.
Right.
So now you have to rely more heavily on their innovation specific human capital than their track record for innovation. And there are other people who come in and they've maybe succeeded with 2 or 3 other innovation projects, and you don't know them personally as well to know whether they're a forward thinker or whether they're, a creative problem solver. But their track record suggests that, they probably are.
Right.
So then you might rely more on the track record.
Right.
Right. But what we see is then that the sponsor is now considering these 3 dimensions kind of simultaneously, adding it up, and then saying, yeah, I'll support you because you have what we're thinking of this what we call innovation capital, meaning enough human capital, social capital, and reputation capital in the arena of innovation. I think you can succeed.
Right.
And therefore, I'll support you.
Right. Talk to us about impression amplifiers.
Okay, so there are times when nobody knows who you are. Nobody has any reason to believe you. There's a whole field in academic research on impression management, where we're trying to manage the impressions of others.
Right.
And we've sort of identified what we feel are a set of tactics that we saw innovators use to influence and persuade others when they really didn't have much else.
Right.
And so I'll give you an example. When you're pitching a new idea that people don't really know about, like how it will work, and it's pretty novel, what we saw is people using what we called comparing, which was comparing your idea in terms of an analogy or a metaphor with another idea that they do understand. And what that does is it simplifies sort of the process of understanding the idea, but also they're more likely to believe it. So I had some students who decided they wanted to start a company where they would go to people who had extra storage in their homes or garages, and they wanted to rent that to people who needed storage. So they said, you know what, we're going to
like an Airbnb for too much stuff.
Storage. That's right.
Got it.
So that's what they decided. We're the Airbnb of storage. And when you hear Airbnb of storage, you're like, okay, I get it right away.
Right.
Or there's, we talked to.
This is just on a personal note. Like, I don't even want my own junk in areas of storage. The idea of having other people's junk in areas of storage is like, it seems like a nightmare. And having so much stuff that I just have to store it away in other people's places that I would never look at, but I can't let go of. Like, I feel like there's a whole business in just helping those people.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's a different business model.
It's a different business model.
But that's sort of, what you're trying to do with a comparing amplifier is help people understand your idea and see why it might be successful by connecting it to a successful.
Got it. And you see this in Hollywood all the time. Like, it's people describe movies. It's Jaws, but in space.
Right.
Kind of thing. Right.
That's right. So that is an example of one where you're trying to clarify your idea.
Right.
Another example would be what we call materializing your idea, making it visible, sort of tangible, so people can kind of get, what you're doing. Right. And so we know about prototypes and product representations. I think one of the interesting examples we use in the book is with SpaceX, actually. And SpaceX couldn't get NASA and sort of the existing infrastructure of folks to take them seriously. Beale Aerospace was a private venture, had gone bankrupt before. They hadn't been able to get the attention. And so what Musk decided to do was sort of show the doubters that they could build a rocket, right? And that, they were for real. So they load the 7-story Falcon rocket on a trailer, take it across the country to the Air and Space Museum, and they put it next to the Air and Space Museum with spotlights on the night of the 100-year anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight. And there's a big gala there with people from NASA and, again, aerospace companies. And Musk, basically gets up and says, if you want to see the future of aerospace, go outside and take a look at our rocket. And they hadn't been able to get NASA to come out. And within 2 months after that, NASA is scheduled to come out and take a look at what they were doing in their facilities. So just by making that idea, the rocket's like visible, tangible, we can do this, he was able to persuade them to give SpaceX a serious look.
It's interesting because it's when Bezos just came out, because Bezos is sort of part of this, you talk about him as an innovator, and he's part of this sort of competition with NASA to try to get people on the moonshot.
Yeah, his company is called Blue Origin.
Blue Origin, yeah, and he did the same thing. He announced it, and he had a model of it, just kind of to display in some sense. It's to kind of say, hey, we could do this, and here's our in effect life-size prototype.
That's right. And it could be a video. I mean, if you go to look at Boring, the website, where he's wanting to bore these tunnels, you will see front and center a little video that gives the sort of video of how it might work.
Right.
And then people are like, oh, I kind of get that. Before I wasn't quite sure what you were talking about.
One of the things that I'm hearing you say also is as soon as you say the words image management, I have a negative reaction. And I imagine especially a lot of innovators might have negative reactions because there's something pristine about innovation. And when you start to think about like image management, it feels so superficial and thin. And yet one of the things that you're saying that's so important about this book and about the idea, which is you can have all the most amazing ideas in the world, which mean nothing unless you execute them. And to execute them, you actually need people to buy into them. And to get people to buy into them, it actually matters what you look like and what your image is and how they see you. And that makes a difference. And so it's kind of a reality that the reality of life, which is that as an innovator, it's not just about your ideas. It's about whether people are buying into them and supporting them and making them happen. And that's what creates a really great innovator. And that's what you're describing in Innovation Capital.
Yeah. And the other thing, though, is after you start to build some innovation capital so that you're known in the marketplace, then you can actually get attention for your ideas from potential customers. Right. So if the Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk or a Mark Zuckerberg or a Satya Nadella, any of those folks start to talk about new products, new services that are being launched,
we're going to listen. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so then it actually helps with, awareness, trial, and adoption.
Right.
New products. So it's valuable in actually selling what you come up with.
Jeff, I don't know, 20 years later, do you now feel like an innovator? Like you went into this in order to sort of stoke up your own innovation. You've written a bunch of books. You've learned about it. How do you feel about yourself?
So, actually, when we did the Innovator's DNA, we created an assessment. And we assessed the extent to which you engage in certain behaviors that we have found are more pronounced in innovators.
Right.
And we used this assessment in our research, and we did it with a large sample, and we published our results in the top academic journal in entrepreneurship to show that these certain behaviors that we identify in the innovator's DNA, which were questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting, are more pronounced in innovators. And if you can engage them more frequently, you'll come up with more ideas. So I have had the chance to take that assessment on multiple occasions now. And, I'm happy to say that I actually do engage in especially networking behaviors much more frequently than I did before to get new ideas. And I have over time been able to, write some books that I think are somewhat innovative, develop a couple of assessments around innovation at the individual level. At the organ, we have a new innovation leadership assessment with Innovation Capital, where you can assess your own innovation capital and your own innovation sort of leadership. And so I feel like I've now actually created some new products, books, assessments that are a little bit innovative and hopefully making a difference for individuals and organizations who want to be more innovative.
Jeff Dyer, he wrote the book along with Nathan Furr and Curtis LaFrant, Innovation Capital, How to Compete and Win Like the World's Most Innovative Leaders. Jeff, it's been such a delight to get to know you a little bit and to have you on the Bregman Leadership Podcast. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your ideas.
Peter, thanks so much. It's been great to visit with you and your audience.